Happy Thursday. Apologize I didn't get a chance to get this done on Tuesday. Tuesday was just kind of crazy. But we're going to do the clue review for the previous Thursday's Mystery Grape and Blind Tasting Benchmark region. The answer was Merlot from Pomerol, which is definitely a benchmark wine for this grape. And so it's one that's really worth getting to know because a Pomerol, and yes, it's a blend. You know, it could have some Cab Franc and it could even have some Cab Sauv. It's usually always going to be majority Merlot, though, so it really is Merlot. Is going to be very different than like a Napa Valley Merlot. And it's going to be different than a left bank Bordeaux. It's going to be Cabernet dominant. I mean, that's always one of the tough things in blind tasting, left bank, right bank. So let's dive in a little bit into the clues here and see, what aspect of Merlot jumps out that we can make the connection to in the glass. So starting with the flavor and aroma clues. Clue number 1, red plums and blue flowers. I spent a lot with these clues looking for images that had multiple items in it because there's a lot going on in this wine and I really wanted to convey that. So as much as I could pick 2 or 3 things in, I did. Clue number 2 was red strawberries, blueberries, and blackberries. So already starting to see a little pattern there with a lot of different colors of fruit. Clue 3 was red and black cherries. So red fruit, little blue fruit, and a little black fruit. This is something that is very typical of Merlot. Merlot tends to lean a little bit more towards the red fruit. That's kind of where it starts. But as a mid-ripening grape, and especially in the age of climate change, it can go towards dark fruit. Give it longer hang time, it's going to get darker fruit. In Bordeaux, they do want to maintain some of the freshness. That is the trait of Bordeaux. That food-friendly, that fresh aspect of it. And yes, climate change is trying hard against it, but you do have a lot of Bordeaux producers that still strive for that. So you usually will see that mix. Not all the way dark, and nowadays it's unfortunately not going to be all the way red with that. It's usually going to be a mix. So that's what you want to pay attention to as you're doing your blind tastings and writing your notes. What is the kind of mix of fruit that you're getting? Clue 4, ferns. Green leafy ferns. Now this threw a lot of folks off. This was a clue that I got from Guildsum and it resonated a lot with me because Bordeaux varieties do tend to have green notes. Merlot is a Bordeaux variety. But Merlot is not a grape that shows a lot of big pyrazines like you think of with Cab Sauv, Carmenere, Cab Franc. So its greenness is not that overt green bell pepper, jalapenos, kind of smacking upside the head. It's a little bit more subtle. And so some of those leafier greens, like fern, which is kind of a fresh, almost floral green, that seeing that clue on Guildsum really resonated because that is a good aspect of that greenness that you would see in a wine like Pomerol, much more than a lot of New World Merlots. Clue 5 was another one that had multiple items in it. It was a mint Mocha Latte. So mint, another little bit of aspect of that little greenness that could pop out. I find that more definitely in Bordeaux than I would in a New World one. And then coffee and chocolate with the Mocha Latte. Chocolate is a note that I really get a lot with Merlot in different aspects. It's a little bit more overt and sweet, I think, and particularly when I think of like a big, lush Napa Merlot that spent time in New Oak. But chocolate definitely pops out. And for me, that becomes a little bit of a trouble spot because I think of the other grapes that I usually get a lot of chocolate with. Malbec and New World Shiraz on that. So that's something I always kind of have to fight with when I'm doing my tastings. And then clue 6, Christmas fruitcake. This is one of the classic descriptions, especially of like Bordeaux, because you got a lot of spices going on. All those different baking spices that go into the fruitcake. You've got fruit with that. But fruitcake's one of those things that, yes, it's a sweet dessert, but it's also kind of a very savory sweet dessert. And that really hits old world Merlot very well. Merlot likes to have sweet fruit. That's what the grape naturally lends itself towards. But in a lot of old world wines, those classic wines, very much Bordeaux, the savoriness is never far behind. So that's why I think Christmas fruitcake is a really good descriptor for a good Pomerol. Now let's get to the structure clues. Medium ruby to medium garnet. These are wines that are built for aging, and so often you will get a good, decently aged example. They'll show you a little garnet around the rim. But it's never going to be an inky black wine. It's always going to be kind of more in that ruby family, and then until it gets older to the garnet. Medium plus to pronounced intensity. As I did with these clues, there's a lot going on. Your notes are going to be pretty descriptive with these wines here. So that's usually a big clue that you're in a region, a little bit more premium quality region. Medium plus to high acidity. Now this threw some folks off that were thinking Merlot because you often don't associate Merlot with acidity. But this is where we think about going back to Bordeaux. So Bordeaux is more of a moderate climate. It's not as warm as Napa Valley. It's not as warm as a lot of the other New World region. Chile could have some areas where it could put a little cooler influence, but for the most part, Chile is a little bit warmer of an area. So you do want to have, with that more moderate climate, think about more acidity. And the soils in Bordeaux are fairly cool soils, especially on the right bank. There's a lot of clay there. Now, yes, there's some gravel and some sand, but not as much as what we're thinking about when we think about the left bank with those warmer soils. That's why Cab is planted more on the left bank, those warmer soils that it needs to help ripening. Merlot is perfectly fine and dandy on cooler soils. And even in the areas of Pomerol that do have some clay, do have some gravel and do have some sand, it's actually over a bedrock of clay. So when those older vines, those roots penetrate deep, they're still reaching those cooler soils. And so that's going to slow down that ripeness a little bit and help us retain some of that precious acidity, that freshness that we're looking for. Tannins. Medium plus to high tannins. And then if you're doing a WSET certification, you always want to make sure you comment on the nature of the tannins. And this one I thought long and hard about. I ultimately went with velvety as a tannin because it's not as, fine grain, and it's certainly not as firm as you think about some of the Cabernet varieties. And I like velvety a lot because this is something that I've been wrestling with my own blind tastings, especially after working through Nick Jackson's Master of Wine's book, Beyond Flavor. He talks a lot about the two textures of Merlot and how Merlot is a unique grape, and that the fruit has a more plush, plummy texture, but the tannins themselves have a little bit more of a grainy, sticky, clay-like texture to it. And good blind tasters, that is a big tell for them that they have a Merlot in their mouth, is when they pick up the two different textures of the fruit. And so trying to think about this on it. So I went with velvety instead of silky. You often hear a lot of Merlot, especially again going back to Napa Merlot, silky tannins. Well, think about velvet. Think about the fabric of velvet versus the fabric of silk. Velvet, yes, it's soft, but velvet has some texture to it. Just picture running your hands over, a velvet glove. You're feeling some texture to it. And I do think that thinking of that item of there's softness, but there's texture with it, is a good way of conceptualizing it. Another way, I like to bring in food treats for good metaphors here. Let's go back to chocolate here. When I had this chocolate, I love Cocoa Runners, by the way, really great subscription plan. This chocolate here blew me away. Taza chocolate, it's a stone ground, kind of Mexican style chocolate from Boston, in the US actually. I would almost describe this as kind of like a reverse of the two textures of Merlot. When you have this chocolate here, which I highly recommend trying, obviously you can get it easily in the US, but you can even get it in the UK. The first thing that will hit you is the graininess of that stone ground. It's not a smooth, silky chocolate. But when you have it sit in your mouth for a little while, then you start getting the softness coming. And that's where that velvet texture really hits. The grain, and then it melts into the softness. So again, they're kind of a reverse of Merlot. When you have a Merlot in your mouth, the first thing you're going to get is that softness, plushiness of the fruit. But then as you hold it in your mouth and work it a little bit, that's where some of the texture, some of that sticky, some of that clayiness, some of that velvetiness comes through on it. So again, good chocolate, definitely worth trying, and just kind of for yourself, seeing how it works. Not a bad pairing. I don't like pairing chocolate with wine myself, but it's not a bad pairing. And just to continue the chocolate metaphor, when I think about the chocolate aspect of like a Malbec or like a New World Shiraz, it's not the stone ground at all. It's more that silky in your mouth chocolate. All right, that was my little tannin tangent. Now back to the structure notes. Full body, a lot of sugar, good potential with the high alcohol. Medium to high alcohol, though nowadays going over 14% is pretty much almost the norm, even in Bordeaux. But you still find a few that are labeled like 13.5%. But climate change is really kind of up in that. And then quality, very good to outstanding. All those different notes, all the different color spectrums of fruit, all the different spices and the green notes, the floral notes. There's a lot of complexity going on. And then price, premium to super premium. It's hard to get a good, cheap Pomerol with it. It's a small area, a lot of small holdings on there, and so limited production. And those are the clues for Merlot from Pomerol. And with that, I will get going on today's game. With that, we'll do another blind tasting one, classic variety. So have a good one.